Hello and welcome to another episode of The Brothers Discuss. I'm Alex.
And I'm Chris.
Alright, so this episode is just going to be nothing but an X-Men 97 discussion. So you and I talked about our thoughts going into the show, and now we have the first season. We've had some opinions on this. We weren't exactly on board from the get-go like a lot of people were. You know, legacy shows don't always work. They very rarely do, in my opinion. So, of course, if it's good, and everything works out, and everything's great. So I guess to start off, Chris, what did you think of X-Men 97? Were we right? Was it terrible?
Not at all. This is actually definitely one of the best things Marvel's put out in a while. And, this wasn't like, I might have said this like when we first talked about it initially, like this isn't geared towards people like me. Like I didn't grow up with the old X-Men show. Like I watched a couple episodes here and there, and then I just recently just watched the whole thing to get ready for this. So it is, like you said, a legacy show, and that was kind of like the biggest thing for me is that this is not just like season 6. You know, it's not just a revival. Like it is a whole new show with like part of the identity and style of the original.
Yeah, so to echo your sentiment, I will also say this was not terrible. It was definitely not terrible, which is probably the thing I'm happiest to say about all of this. Yeah, I guess to quickly explain who I am as an X-Men fan for people that may not know. I definitely grew up with the animated series. That was my introduction to Marvel as a whole. And since then, with the movies and obviously reading comics as well, I'm a really big X-Men fan. I'm a huge Cyclops fan as well. So watching this first season, and not only is there great X-Men stuff in it, there's a lot of really good Cyclops stuff. And it's hard to put into words how important that is if you aren't like me and you aren't a really big Cyclops fan, because I've been starving for some good Cyclops stuff. And like, I don't read a lot of modern X-Men comics, and some of it I read or that I hear is good, I might check out. But a lot of it isn't really for me these days, so I'm actually looking forward to this new era that they're about to start soon. It looks like a nice jumping on point. But yeah, I haven't had a lot of good Cyclops material to invest in for a long time, and this show had a lot of it. So that was very, very great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very happy with that. But is it exactly the animated series? No, it doesn't really feel the same. But is it a good X-Men show? So far, I would definitely say yes. And like you were saying, like this wasn't something that they just brought back because they wanted to bring back something that was popular on Disney Plus to watch, but they actually had a proper idea of what to do. And not only that, but they clearly have ideas of what they're doing with season 2. And apparently they're in the editing stages of that now. I mean, it's full steam ahead, which is very exciting. It's very neat that there's an X-Men thing to continue to look forward to going into the future. And this just wasn't a one-off thing.
Yeah.
I think what we can do is we can just go through each episode, talk about it as long as we want. And but I guess for this first episode, we'll do like very broad strokes, bigger picture with this one. So with this first episode, I felt, which I unfortunately don't have the episode titles on hand at the moment, so I do apologize. But the first episode, to me, this one was kind of a Force Awakens take on Night of the Sentinels, essentially, in the sense that it's
my X-Men. To me, my X-Men is the.
That's it.
I don't know.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, to me, my X-Men. So I felt this one was like a Force Awakens like take on Night of the Sentinels, the very first episode of the original animated series.
Yeah.
Where you have a character that's got a troubled life as a mutant, and they are accepted into the Xavier School, and you could tell that it's made by people who really care about the animated series, and several of those people who are making it were involved with the original show. Then there's other things where I don't want to just talk about the negatives right off the bat, but there's influences from more modern X-Men stuff that bother me a little bit because it doesn't feel like 90s X-Men to me, which is a hard thing to shake. But okay, a little one right off the bat is Magneto's helmet. For those who don't know, Magneto's helmet nowadays, you think of it and it's like it blocks Xavier's telepathic powers. That's not what it did in the original show. It wasn't until the very first X-Men movie where they introduced that concept where David Hayter, voice of Solid Snake and writer of really good movies, decided, well, he was asked like, well, wait, why can't Xavier just like stop Magneto? He was like, oh shit, you're right. The helmet, it blocks his power. Since Xavier and Magneto are both tied together so much, having him wear the helmet for that reason makes total sense. But that's not what it was in the original show. And it's funny how things from the movies, and this is for all comic book movies, sometimes they do seep their way into the comics and they become lore. And sometimes they're really good ideas and it makes perfect sense. That is one of them. Unfortunately, they've kind of had to adapt that into the show, and they've kind of retconned the helmet. Like, if he sort of said, like, I thought it'd be a way to stop Charles from getting into my brain, and it failed or something, then it's at least a slight explanation. Like, you didn't need it there. It was so that kind of annoyed me.
Sure.
Do you have a particular take on this first episode?
Well, I'm kind of in the same boat. It was a nice reintroduction to those that are familiar with the show, but like, I feel like it did a good enough job because I'm sure there is a large audience that didn't see the original show. So like this does a good enough job like explaining where all these characters are at. They're kind of like a pretty well-established X-Men without Xavier. And, I don't really have like too many complaints. I didn't really even think about the helmet because like that's kind of how I grew up with X-Men was that's what the helmet did. So I didn't even think about that with how it was used in the original show.
Yeah, no, because in the original show, there's a moment where Xavier is making Magneto relive the Holocaust, and he's got the helmet on, so it doesn't do it in the original show. But I mean, just in general, like there's like lots of good character work, and not just this episode, but throughout the whole season. And there's a lot of really, really good Cyclops stuff, and there's like lots of fans saying like sharing lots of like clips of Cyclops fighting. And they're like, oh, see, Cyclops was always a badass. And I'm like, where were you when your own people needed you? Fighting. I mean, look, I'm not going to gatekeep Cyclops, but it's funny to see all these people being like, oh, see, he was always a badass. And it's like, I've had to put up with that scrutiny for years. Where were you? But this is so far one of the very best characterizations of Cyclops. I find his characterization in the animated series really interesting because he is the leader that has to make the tough choices, and that inherently can make you unlikable. And they take that aspect of him in the comics, which is very stern and very kind of brooding, and they did it in a very interesting way, adapted it in an interesting way in the original show. This time, he's a good mix. He's still very authoritative and everything, but he's mellowed out a little bit, and he seems to have fun. Like when he's fighting the Friends of Humanity, like he smirks and everything. Like he feels a little bit quippy, which is not really the character from the animated series. But if it's just like a slight update to him, because a little bit of time has passed, I'm fine with that. It's a very good characterization. And I guess something we could do is go down the list of all the characters and say what we think of each one so far. So I guess while we're on the subject of Cyclops, we'll also mention voice actors as well. So off the bat, we have Ray Chase as Cyclops. What did you think?
I thought he did a really great job. It's like it's a good way of like honoring the original voice actor without just being a direct impression, really.
Yeah.
And that's definitely, I was really happy with his performance in this show and his character. Like Cyclops has always been one of the more interesting X-Men for me, and that's always been the case, and it's true here as well. He's definitely one of my favorite characters of the show so far.
Yeah, I think I would be distracted if it was someone that was doing an impression. Ray Chase does a really good job, and Norm Spencer passed away a few years ago now, so that's why it's not him. But yeah, I think he does a really good job, and I enjoyed the characterization overall. Next, we have Jennifer Hale as Jean Grey. This is actually she's actually voiced the character before. I mean, Jennifer Hale is a veteran voice actress at this point, but she's voiced Jean in Wolverine the X-Men, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, among other things, I think. Jean Grey in the original show is a bit of a joke to certain fans. Like, there's like lots of compilation videos of Jean Grey is useless. And, I guess that's another thing to bring up real quick. Not a lot of screaming in this show.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, different show, different time, I guess. But not as much screaming in this one. What do you think of Jean?
I thought she was really good. Obviously, there's a lot that happens with her in the next few episodes that we'll definitely discuss. Um, but I like how it starts off. I like that she's pregnant and she and Scott are starting a family, and I like where that leads. And
Mhm.
so I thought she was really good in this for the most part.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Next, we have AJ Locascio as Gambit. So let me ask you this. Do you think this voice was better than the season 5 Gambit voice?
I don't really remember season 5 Gambit off the top of my head, but just based off of this show, like I thought he was really good.
Yeah, like if I'm comparing him to season 5 Gambit, he's way better. Chris Potter, who voiced Gambit in the original show, I mean, it's iconic. It's kind of iconic. I mean, so much of that character is in that voice and his delivery of lines. Like even in his first 10 seconds on screen, like as long as I have someone to play with, like the way he delivers these lines, like he's so much fun. And a lot of the fun comes from the vocal performance. This guy tried really hard. Apparently there's a photo that went around of him dressed up as Gambit when he was like graduating high school or something. So I'm happy for someone like that gets this opportunity. Like he's doing his best, but it's very hard to match the original performance. So he definitely feels one of the most different performances to me.
Mm-hmm.
But interesting thing to note, Chris Potter did return as Cable. And then interestingly enough, Lawrence Bain, who voiced Cable in the original show, went on to voice the Executioner in the second episode. So I don't know what was going on there. I mean, voices age, so I guess they just try to find ways to put them in the other roles.
Sure.
Yeah. Next up is Holly Cho as Jubilee. What'd you think?
I thought it was this again also a good choice, and I'm fine with Jubilee getting recasted for this show, and she's just as energetic and fun as always. And they do have a nice tribute with her in the 4th episode, I believe.
Yes.
So that was a nice little detail there. So and I enjoyed Jubilee in this season too. She was fun.
Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit of a problem I have with certain aspects of the show. Like, they use certain terminology that I don't know if we were using in 1997. Like, I don't know if bestie was really common terminology for best friend in describing Magneto and Xavier as besties.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think she does a really good job at sounding like Jubilee. The original voice actress, Allison Cord, did return for a role, which we'll talk about later, but she wasn't an Asian actress. I mean, however you feel is however you feel. When you're doing a voice, you're playing someone that you don't have to look like. But I also do think that Asian actors should have the opportunity to voice Asian characters. So I understand the change. That makes sense. But I'm also glad that the original actors gets to still be part of the show in some way because, actors got to act. But
yeah,
I liked her performance, and I particularly liked her characterization in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, we have J.P. Karliak as Morph. I'll kick this one off, actually.
Okay.
I do love that their main thing that they do with their powers is turn into other mutants for fight scenes. I think that's quite inspired. I think that's great. That's my favorite part of Morph. They also turn into Sabretooth to cheer up Wolverine and give him something to do, which is, fight Sabretooth. What I don't love about Morph is pretty much everything else. They don't feel like the same character at all. Like they feel way younger, and I don't.
Yeah.
Look, I don't care about the non-binary thing. I mean, that's the main thing people are jumping on. I don't give a fuck. It's fine. I don't know. I also don't know if that was a term we were using in the 90s, but whatever. But I don't love how they look like their Age of Apocalypse self. Like, I thought if they were going to do that, they'd at least explain it, but they haven't. Like, they just look like that. I mean, that was weird to me. Like, when we first see Morph, like, they walk in pretending to be Xavier, and Cyclops tells them to stop being so creepy. So then they just turn into this gray, bald guy. And it's like, I thought one of the characters would say, like, so this is your new mutation, Morph? Or, like, you're gonna stay this way or something? Nothing. They just look like that now. And no explanation. And I find that disappointing. But the main thing is he just doesn't sound like Morph. Like they don't act like Morph, and I love Wolverine's friendship with Morph because that's a big part of the animated series. Like this one's for you, Morph, and all that, and he's the only one who can make me laugh. I mean, they clearly have an established friendship before he dies in the second episode of the original show. Like it just doesn't feel like the same character to me, so I'm a little disappointed because I like Morph. How about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. It just felt like most of his history in the original show was just kind of ignored. And again, I'm not really. It was kind of weird, like no one really acknowledged his appearance. I mean, again, time has passed, so like
Sure.
whatever. But still, it was kind of. I had the same reaction. I was like, oh, that's Morph, I guess. So yeah, I'm kind of on the same page.
Yeah. Next is Isaac Robinson Smith as Bishop. Um, I remember there was so much talk from the people releasing the show in the build-up that this will take place immediately after the last episode, and that is just very clearly not the case. Like
Yeah.
at least several months have passed because of of how pregnant Jean is, and then suddenly Bishop is just hanging around. I don't remember the
Yeah.
exact explanation as to why he was there. Like you see Beast like tinkering with some sort of time device in those early episodes, but he's just here, I guess. But I mean, I like that there's another mature person on the team because Cyclops does kind of berate the team for just like playing basketball and not taking what they're doing seriously at one point. I mean, Bishop and Storm feel like the ones that are kind of more level-headed and are like, we've got a mission to do. Yeah. Any thoughts on Bishop?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of the same thing. I was kind of caught off guard that he was just there because I was like, wait, that's not adding up. But I thought he still had a pretty good performance and just roll with the X-Men overall in the show. And so, I was fine with it.
Yeah. And then we have Matthew Watterson as Magneto. So what did you think of him?
Performance-wise, like I thought it was very similar to Cyclops in the show, where it's just like it was a good performance without just feeling like an impression. And character of Magneto, I adore in this show. Like he was fantastic in here, and we'll talk about it more because there's a lot that goes on, but he was great.
Yeah. So David Hemblin, who was the original voice of Magneto, he has an incredible voice. And he also passed away, sadly. But it's a shame that it's not him because that's Magneto to me, like that voice. I mean, Ian McKellen's voice is iconic, but it's Ian McKellen, And I love Fassbender a lot, but to me, it's David Hemblin's voice that I hear when I read comics with Magneto in them. Like I don't know how to describe his voice, but it's wonderful. It's great to listen to. But this performance is very good. I mean, some of the dialogue he has is great. And whenever Magneto just shows the sheer power of mutant kind to humans that are trying to oppress him, like I love that stuff so much. And we get a lot of that really quickly. And you just want to see him just absolutely crush this bigot because he just humiliates the guy. And Magneto and X-Men kind of go hand in hand now at this point. I mean, I've seen some people say like, oh, we get too much Magneto. It's like, well, he's kind of the best villain.
Yeah.
But it's like, you don't want the best villain. Okay. But it's like when they announced that Magneto would be in Dark Phoenix, I was like, do we really need Magneto in the Dark Phoenix again? And then you see that movie and he's the best part of it. And you go, okay, that's why.
Yeah.
I think I'm past that point now where it's like, yeah, do some other X-Men villains, but have Magneto be part of it because Magneto's the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then next is Ross Marquand as Professor Charles Xavier.
So this is a different actor, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Although he has been doing work for MCU stuff for a while now. Notably, he was the Red Skull in Infinity War and Endgame. Okay. And then he did some voices in What If. He was the Ultron robot, and I guess also in Multiverse of Madness as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought he was pretty good in here. Well, again, we'll talk more about Xavier as we get into more episodes, but yeah, I was happy with the performance overall.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same voice actor, but he does, I think, a pretty darn good job at sounding like this Xavier.
Hmm.
I think I talked about this before in the past. I think in the Multiverse of Madness episode. But since the 2000 movie, Xavier has just sounded British or sounded like Patrick Stewart. And in the 90s, he was just this guy with this nasally voice that would go like, ah!
Hmm.
And so it's back. It's nice to see this kind of performance back. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
Incredible power! Ah! You're driving me insane! Next is Gui Agostini as Sunspot. So new character entirely in the show. So what did you think?
I thought it was a nice little parallel. Like even in just the opening credits of the episodes, it's like there's the shot of the original show where like Jubilee is running from the mob, and now that's been replaced with Sunspot, and
Yeah.
that's kind of like where his character is in the show. He's kind of like the new recruit, I guess you could say, where
Hmm.
Jubilee was in the original show, and I thought he was pretty good, and he has a lot more to do in the later episodes, which was nice.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it was a better characterization than we got in the movies, I guess. I mean, look, that can be said for a lot of characters. I mean,
Sure.
and here he's a rich kid and he didn't really want to use his powers because it kind of acknowledged that he was different, and that's created a rift between him and his family, which gets played out further in the future episodes. So it's all good. All right, next we're going to talk about the returning voices, returning as their proper characters this time around. And I want to say, out of the four of these guys that we're going to talk about, I think two in particular sounded great. And
Mhm.
she is the best part of the show, in my opinion. Just to
Mhm.
give you a little hint. But we'll kick things off first with Cal Dodd as Wolverine. What did you think?
I think he sounded pretty good overall. You can tell, he's aged a bit, but I don't think it's the most distracting voice in the show, and
Hmm.
and he's still giving it. Like he still sounds really good for the most part. So like, yeah, I really liked him in this.
Yeah, I like that he's not the focus.
Yeah.
He became so much of the focus of the later seasons of the original show that a lot of characters just got pushed aside because Wolverine's character had grown in popularity by the 90s. Then
Hmm.
the movies come out and they're all about Wolverine as well. So I was glad to see that he wasn't the focus, and not just because I'm a big Cyclops fan or whatever, but he is just a member of the team. And I like what Cal Dodd was doing to the best of his abilities. You know, being so much older and probably not being able to do the gruffness in the same way that he used to. So he definitely sounds more like Old Man Logan in here, but he
Hmm.
also seems to be a little bit more of a mellowed out version of the character, writing wise as well. So it kind of fits his performance, but he's fine. But I like that he's not the focus of the show.
Yeah.
Next, we have Allison Seeley Smith as Storm, and in case anyone was wondering, this is the one I was alluding to earlier. The very first line she says in the first episode, I was like, "Oh my God, Storm is back!"
Yeah.
Um, so there was a different actress who voiced Storm in like the first season or so of the original show, and I always liked that performance a lot because it was a lot more subdued than the Storm we got for the rest of the show. That said, if you're making a sequel to X-Men the Animated Series, you get the voice that voiced her for the rest of the show, and she's great.
Hmm.
Not only does she deliver these big theatrical lines of dialogue the way only Storm does, she also has a powerful moment towards the end of the second episode that's a lot more heartfelt than you'd expect, and she's just great in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love Storm in this a lot, and performance-wise, this is like it, she doesn't sound like she's aged at all. Like it seriously just sounds so seamless, like
I
from the
know, she
original show.
hasn't
It's
missed a
it's really
beat.
impressive.
We get some cool power stuff with a lot of characters in this. And Storm, like, lightning hits the ground and it creates glass when they're fighting Sentinels, which is a really nice detail.
Hmm.
They even reference the fact that she's an Omega level mutant, which was a funny phrase to hear. But yeah, Storm is absolutely one of the best parts of the show. And people don't really talk about this because she did get a bit of less focus in the Singer movies, especially 2 and 3. But she didn't get a ton of characterization, and she's not really Storm the way we all know Storm to be, and she's basically just Halle Berry to me. Like, she's not Storm. Again, similar to Cyclops, it feels like, man, we're finally getting Storm. Like, that's great. And I can't praise what they've done with Storm enough in the show.
Yeah.
Next is George Buza as Beast. What'd you think of him?
I would say if like there were any voices that were like the most distracting, it would probably be this one. Like you can tell he's aged a bit. I mean, he's still good, and it's like, you know, take that statement with like a grain of salt, because it's like he still pulls it off, but like you can just tell compared to the recast or returning actors, like it's just not quite as the same as the original, but still solid.
See, I think Wolverine to me was a little more distracting than Beast. I think Beast was another one that was that worked for me. He said, "Oh dear," and that made me happy.
Oh dear.
That's something that Beast has a lot in the animated series, and I'm pretty sure it was just a sound clip that they would use over and over again. I don't know if they really re-recorded that each time, but yeah, I like Beast. He still sounds pretty much the same, and I'm very happy to see him. I'm always happy to see Beast, even if it's in the Marvels. And he more or less looks the same as he did in the Marvels here.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, and last but not least, we have Lenore Zan as Rogue.
Well, Rogue was a huge part of this show, a lot more than I was expecting her to be.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that, of course, but I thought she was pretty good in this performance-wise, and so yeah, I don't have much else to say right now, but yeah.
I mean, what I'll say is that she just sounds older.
She does, yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. I'm glad that she's had an opportunity to come back, but it's not quite the same performance, and it's also not quite the same writing. You know, I know that Rogue used to have a lot of Southern-isms, you know, like long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs is a famous line that she says in the first episode. And she has a lot more like that, but they give her like 3 in the span of one episode to say at one point. I'm like, okay, it kind of feels like this is how Rogue was written sometimes, so let's write all of her dialogue like this. And she's the one that, like, we're doing stuff with her past that feels like we're retconning some things that I'm not a big fan of personally. But we'll talk about that some more later. I mean, there's a few other notable characters, like Mr. Sinister's voice actor is the same guy as is Nightcrawler. So good mix of returning and new talent all around. But with the first episode, Force Awakens, to me, I will say, I think that's a good comparison, I would say, with this first episode. Because, you know, Force Awakens, it doesn't feel like old Star Wars. It feels like you've got new creatives at the helm, but they're embracing more of the classic style of Star Wars as opposed to the prequels. But this definitely feels like, okay, we're trying to embrace the original style of the show, but we also have to make it a new thing. The second episode, a lot of the story beats that we will be focusing on for the rest of the season happen here. So I think where we should start is there's more than a hinted at relationship with Magneto and Rogue, which is, I would say, is more of a modern comic book thing that they've kind of adapted in this. What did you think of this?
I was like a little surprised at first because like that's such it's quite a bizarre like direction to go with for what at the time was obviously this is a more mature version of the original show. Like that was just like Saturday morning cartoon kid show, and this is definitely aged up from that. And I kind of like had to just adapt with that at first, but like I was fine with it once it got going, and you know, so yeah.
So timeline wise, I'm gonna get geeky here. They couldn't have been together before we first see Magneto in the show because they don't know each other. Like the X-Men barely know Magneto when he first shows up, which they also retcon later. Like they fought Magneto before, so. I don't know. I got the impression that Rogue ran away from home when she was like a teenager, and then Mystique raised her essentially, like Mama. I don't know. Like it doesn't again, it's more of a modern influence that seeped its way in here that I don't particularly care. I mean, they do some really good stuff with it by episode 5, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But I guess the main thing that happens in the second episode is that Storm loses her powers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of this?
I thought that was like a really great cliffhanger, and just directly, after that you have Magneto's like amazing speech, and it's just like everything like ending in that episode was like really great, because then that's when Nathan's born after Cyclops just got his ass kicked, and there's just a lot of great stuff all happening, and yeah, it was really great stuff.
Oh, Chris, can you believe that they made the X-Men woke? Can you believe it's finally happened?
Oh God.
Listen, look. If you call yourself an X-Men fan or just now realizing that that X-Men are woke, I don't know what to tell you. That's always been the case. I mean, we're seeing that a lot right now with a bunch of shows. The Boys, people are like, wait a minute, this show's making fun of the far right. It's like, well,
4 seasons and you finally figured that out. Like, yeah.
And on that note, actually, not to get on too much of a tangent, they're all, those same guys are also like, go read the far better comic book version of The Boys. And then meanwhile, the actual writer of the Boys comic recently said in interviews, like, I'm kind of surprised that they're just now realizing that the show is making fun of them and the comic is making fun of them, because I didn't think they'd be smart enough to pick that up. So guess what? Even the comic book writer hates you. And then we're seeing that with Star Wars as well, with the Acolytes. Actually, I think more so now we're seeing people get up in arms about Ki-Adi-Mundi's age. Because it's
ridiculous.
Look, why are you so up in arms about Ki-Adi-Mundi? Literally, he's just a dude with a penis head. Like, why are you now caring about him all of a sudden? Like, we now have to update his profile on Wikipedia. Oh my God. Like, look, Ki-Adi-Mundi's head technically changes from Phantom Menace to Attack of the Clones, and nobody threw their arms up in the air about that. Look, even Kit Fisto's head changed in between movies. This is one more tangent. I just make fun of Star Wars real quick. Not for the reasons that I'm saying right now about the woke of it all, but just how stupid it is. There was a tweet that somebody says, like, what is your favorite, like, ridiculous in canon Star Wars explanation that you have memorized? And I don't know how in canon this is anymore, but you remember the moment in Revenge of the Sith when all the Jedi go to arrest Palpatine, and then they all get killed one by one except for Mace Windu? Mm-hmm. Do you know why that is? Because it couldn't just be a simple explanation, like Palpatine just does a corkscrew little jump thing. No, it couldn't be something that simple. Apparently, Palpatine sent like a Force riddle or puzzle to all the Jedi's heads, and they all stopped to try and solve it, except for Mace Windu. So it's like, your explanations of this are just making it worse.
Force riddle.
Again, I don't know if this is even canon anymore, but apparently that was the case.
That's amazing. I want to look into that.
But anyways, back to X-Men. Like you were saying with the Magneto speech, they did one of my least favorite bits in X-Men 3 is, Mystique stands in front of Magneto and she gets cured by a cure gun. And he just leaves Mystique there. And it's meant to be like this is the sort of prejudice that Magneto has against regular people. Like, I've never really
one of us.
Yeah, I've never really loved that idea. Like, I think he should be heartbroken that his companion that like this happened to her, and said like he just
companion said, too. Yeah.
Yeah, instead he's just like you were saying, like, you're not one of us anymore, and just leaves her there. And it's like, oh, that kind of makes Magneto really look like the bad guy. Like, and I guess that's a shame that they kind of did that to him even more. And I kind of think it's more interesting if Magneto has a point. Like, it's like they did that same bit and they did it better here. I mean, look, it's X-Men 3, so it's not that hard. But it was very satisfying to see Magneto's reaction to that, because you really want him to crush this guy. Like, he steps on his head, and you really want to see this guy suffer because of what he's done to a character that we like. And, one of the great things about the animated series, I think, is that it taught me as a kid, without really knowing that I was being taught this about bigotry and accepting people who were different. And it deals with all of that in, a fun Saturday morning cartoon, action-packed kind of way. And if you were not aware to what it was doing back then, it only now you're realizing it and you're angry, yeah, you're an idiot. So look, we don't really need to talk about it any more than that, but it's very odd to see that this is actually something people are angry about because it almost feels like a meme. Like I saw the memes of people being like, what? The X-Men are woke? Since when? But it's actually happening. It shouldn't be surprising, but it is. But with all this, with that whole Magneto speech, like it makes you kind of realize why Xavier would leave everything to Magneto. And Jean hints that it's because he wanted Scott and Jean to move on, and it's giving Magneto an opportunity to come around. It takes the last speech that he gave to all the X-Men and to Magneto in the final episode. It gives that a little bit of weight by saying that he's proud of Magneto for basically seeing the light and trying to do the right thing. Him gifting him essentially the keys to the X-Men is giving Magneto the opportunity to actually grow. And it makes a lot more sense when you see how he doesn't take revenge on these senators and this terrible person that was trying to take his powers away. So yeah. I really like using that to show growth for Magneto, as well as it being a really heartbreaking moment for Storm. Again, this character that we like, something terrible happens to her and we really feel it. And that speech that she gives through a letter that she's left Jean, which it was funny that she and Jean, they have a couple of scenes together, and she does refer to Jean as being like a sister to her, which is a reference to an episode during the Dark Phoenix saga where Storm tells Beast, I love her like a sister or something like that. And I've always thought, like, are Storm and Jean that close? I mean, Storm and Rogue are really close, if anything. And Storm and Cyclops are really close. Jean, because she's not involved with as much of the field stuff with the X-Men in these early episodes, you don't get a lot of sense of her relationships with the other X-Men besides Cyclops and a little bit with Wolverine. So this really leans into that. It was like, I remember that episode where that was brought up, and they really lean into it here, like I said. So she leaves Jean this letter because she says, I can't do this in person. And then we get the big cliffhanger where there is another Jean Grey. And that leads straight into the third episode. What did you think of the third episode?
It was weird. I think that's definitely for sure. It warmed up to me a little bit as I watched the rest of the show. Like I was a little bit more okay with the idea, but at first I was just like, oh wait, she's the Jean Grey that's pregnant is a clone. Mm-hmm. And we don't really know exactly when in the original show's timeline where this happens. There's speculations, but like we really just don't know when.
Yeah. So I definitely didn't like this episode as much as the first two. They adapted a big storyline from the comics, and they did what could have been done in several episodes. They did in the span of one. Mm-hmm. I didn't love how they handled Scott dealing with all of it. I mean, the way he kind of washes his hands of what they do with his son felt very strange to me. But I especially thought he just immediately is kind of sure that clone Jean is a clone. Like that was odd to me. Like she was like, Scott, come on, tell them. And he was just kind of silent. Like he wasn't like, let's talk about this and try and figure it out and work it out. Like he tries it maybe a little bit later in the episode to do that, but it was a little too late for me. But I think in terms of adapting a storyline like this, in the comics, the clone story is nonsense. Scott in the comics grieves over Jean, and then a woman who looks exactly like her and has her exact abilities. It's just like, oh, great, a new woman. I'm glad they didn't do that. I kind of like that they started with she thinks that she is Jean. She's not just this mysterious woman who looks exactly like her. And the inclusion of Sinister, the Sinister stuff felt very rushed to me in this episode as well. I mean, clone storylines in comics are so convoluted as it is. I mean, just look at how the Spider-Man animated series tried to utilize it. I mean, they even addressed in the show, this is starting to sound like a bad comic book plot. So I guess they did the best they could. It just felt way too rushed. I think that's my biggest problem with the episode. It's everything, not just Sinister. Like at the
Yeah.
end, like the clone just goes, just call me Madeline Pryor. She just came up with a whole new name. Like, yeah, I'm ducking hard on this
There's no
episode.
build up to that name, and
Yeah,
it's a big name too.
I
It's like
know.
you just come up with that.
Yeah, and like I'm ducking hard on this episode. Maybe I should let you speak now.
Well, I don't really have too much to say about it. You kind of you said most of it already. I was a little bit more okay with the Cyclops stuff because he's kind of like he doesn't really know like who he loves right now. Like, is
Mm.
it his old gene or this gene? And he's just trying to figure all that out. So I was fine with that for the most part. But
Yeah.
it was kind of weird that like he didn't really have clone genes back at all. It was just like he just kind of like let her fend for herself until the end of the episode. But again, it was like as the show kept going, I was a little bit more okay with this idea. But it was weird at first for me. But it did warm up on me.
Okay. I think I like conceptually the idea that Scott doesn't want to abandon his child because that's what happened to him. But again,
Yeah,
within the continuity of the show, he and his dad have made up, and he knows that his dad didn't abandon him. Like they
right.
addressed that in the original show. So I like the idea, but I didn't think it was handled the best. Like he does just abandon him in the end. Like he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to abandon him, and then he leaves the room.
And he just, yeah.
But other than that, I like the Forge tease at the end. I give that an A+.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about the conversation that Jean and Madeline have about, like, we don't know when Sinister switched us because it makes Scott's uncertainty or lack of significant empathy for Madeline's situation even more strange. Because the fact that it could have happened when we were the Phoenix, it could have happened after we were married, like, we don't know. It's like, well, from that logic, it could have happened literally at any time. Like, we could have been watching Madeline Pryor throughout the events of the old show. Like, I felt like I wanted an answer from that. Like, I do kind of appreciate them kind of outright being like, saying, we're not going to give you an answer. But it now does convolute the already confusing events of the old show.
Yeah.
So,
who knows?
Madeline, yeah.
And maybe we'll get a season 2 explanation. That'll be maybe one of the main focuses. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So Madeline Pryor, the Goblin Queen, that's another thing. She just announces herself as the Goblin Queen.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're not doing like a Dr. Otto Octavius and everyone laughs. Like I'm glad we're not doing that type of humor, but it is a funny thing to say. Like, I will now be called the Goblin Queen. Like, what the heck does that mean? Yeah, that's all I have to say about episode 3, really. Episode 4. Interestingly, this is the one episode of the show where it's 2 episodes in one.
It's 2 episodes in one, yeah.
Which not even the original show did, which was interesting. It didn't really do 2-part episodes or 2 episodes within one. Like it's a common trait of a lot of 90s cartoons and cartoons today, but it was funny seeing X-Men incorporate that because that was not a show that did that. So
Right.
we have 2 very different toned episodes. We have
Yes.
The Motendo one, was the return of Mojo, and he traps Jubilee and Sunspot in a video game that Mojo has created because he loves using the X-Men as his stars, as his forms of entertainment. What do you think of this one?
I thought it was fine. It was fun. Definitely like the most like filler episode of the show, but it's fine. Like Mojo's just such a. I've always like thought of him as like the villain from like Space Jam.
He kind of is. I never thought of that.
He pretty much is, yeah. But what I like about it though is like, sure, you could complain it's a filler episode. I don't really have an issue with filler episodes anymore. And that's kind of like the thing I like about it is that it's that hint of the original animated series identity in this show where it's like you do have your Mojo episode in here, but you still have all this other stuff. You have Magneto, you have Sinister, and you still have all of that in one season. And like I'm fine with that. What's interesting to me though is that we said it earlier. This is 2 episodes in one. The second half though is already part of a 2-parter.
Oh yeah.
It's so bizarre. It's like, why didn't you just make it one episode
Yeah,
then?
that was gonna be my point. I mean, we'll talk about that in a moment. But I mean,
Sure.
getting back to the Jubilee Mojo episode, I mean, this episode was fun. I mean, it's Jubilee's 18th birthday, and she wants to go to the arcade, and
Mhm.
Magneto just wants her to train instead. So she ends up getting to do both. Like she gets a workout where her life is at risk, and she gets to play a video game as well. And then also in the episode, this is the episode where the original Jubilee voice actress does return as an older Jubilee. So what, does she just turn white?
I don't know.
Like
I
that
was
that
fine
is
with it
it
though.
is
It
it
was,
yeah, it's exactly having your cake and eating it too. It's like what's
yeah.
funny to me is that they sound so similar. It's like I didn't realize it was the original actress on my first watch. Like I discovered that later and it's like, oh, they do sound the same. Like it's a really good voice match. And
Mhm.
I guess if she sounds a little bit different, it's okay because she's older and that actress is also older. But like it is exactly having your cake and eating it too. Like we want to be progressive and have this Asian character voiced by an Asian actress, but we also like the old actress and we'll use her anyway, playing an older version of that character. It's just funny to me. The only thing that I think a lot of people thought is that Arcade, the villain Arcade, might be a part of the episode because they never really did him in the animated series. And notably
Yeah.
Arcade, there was Arcade's Revenge, the video game from like the early 90s. I believe it was 92, the same year the original show debuted. But that's just me. But anyways, but then like you were saying, the second episode in this episode, Life Death, this should have been a full episode. Like I could have taken a full episode of this,
Mhm.
to be totally honest. But then even when we do get Life Death Part 2, that's kind of mixed in with another storyline that's separate from that.
Yeah.
It's just a really bizarre way to structure it, in my opinion. I have
And
some theories as to why they did that.
I think so.
But
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that because I think I know why too. But um, yeah. Well, what's interesting is that like everything that's happening in the life death story with like Storm and Forge, it's like it's all great stuff. But yeah, it's just like I just wish it was just condensed into one episode.
yeah, like Forge tells Storm that he loves her, and to us, the audience, that they've spent like 5 minutes together. So
Yeah.
it was very unclear how much time has passed. And then, I mean, we'll get to it. I mean, but in the next episode, Cyclops says that this has been going on for a few months or something. And that, again, to us, the audience, has only been a couple of weeks. So time is flowing by, and this episode probably needed to establish that time has gone by. And they didn't really do that properly because instead it sort of felt like Forge professed his love for Storm, who he barely knows.
Yeah.
Then we're also introduced to the adversary, which was also voiced by the same actress that voices Storm,
Oh, okay.
interestingly enough. And I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed because at first I was like, oh, wait, are we doing the Shadow King? With the glowing eyes, like peering around the corner, which, funny enough, is iconography for the Legion TV show. Um, but I would argue you didn't need to even call this episode Life Death Part 1. Like, you could have just had this be... I mean, it feels a little bit like it's a prologue to a bigger story. Like, calling it Part 1 implies that it's equal when it's not. So
Hmm.
I don't think I would have titled this episode that if we go in for semantics, but this could have just been an interesting prologue at the end of the Jubilee episode, which it feels like anyway.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at the end of this episode that we had, two fine episodes back to back with the third episode and now the fourth episode. And they didn't have the strength of the first two episodes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The fifth episode is a different story.
Yes.
All the big stuff happens in the fifth episode, which I dare say follows the Disney Plus MCU formula of the fourth episode being the turning point episode, but they did in the fifth here.
Hmm.
So on Genosha, we have Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit coming over. That we also get introduced to Nightcrawler, the Hellfire Club, among others. Madeline Pryor's also here as well,
Hmm.
who is having mind sex with Scott Summers, essentially.
Yeah.
But interspersed with that, we get this really cool sequence at the mansion where there's a TV interview where they're trying to get the voices from the mutant side. And through that's where Cyclops gets a little testy.
Yeah.
And, modern Cyclops is one that a lot of people gravitate towards because he kind of takes Xavier Magneto's ideologies and kind of combines them into something that makes it a little bit more sense. Like, Magneto's is, generally speaking, a lot more aggressive and sort of prejudiced against humans. And then Xavier, I mean, obviously we all know what his ideology is. So, like, you have Cyclops who comes along and kind of combines the two in a way that's just more realistic. Like, the humans are never going to totally trust us. We can't aim for that, but we can aim for something else. So this Cyclops is a little step further than that because he kind of loses his cool. And it says, like, you guys aren't like us, and you'll never understand us. Mm-hmm. What do you think? What do you think of this whole, like, a TV interview stuff?
I thought it was pretty good. It was definitely... It was weird at first seeing Cyclops react that way, but... again, paying attention to the dialogue and just like kind of he doesn't really, there's a lot that's going on in his head right now. He's not leading the X-Men anymore. He doesn't know like what's going on with Jean and Madeline and just like he just lost his son. So it's just like,
yeah,
it makes perfect sense for him to snap like that, amidst like objectively and existentially everything that's just going on. So it's just like, I was like, that was all pretty good.
Yeah, I like how this Cyclops, without Xavier and with all this stress in his life, this is kind of what triggers him being this way. Like, having to give up his son, and we talked about how it didn't make a lot of sense, that he's like, I don't want to abandon my son, like my dad abandoned me, even though that didn't make a lot of sense. And then he kind of abandoned him. But what has come with that, it's not like he's just moved on from that. He's still dealing with this. Like, yeah. Like he's really tormented by this. And then we also, like I joked earlier, we get psychic sex, if you want to call it that, between him and Madeline. But we do get a clue that Emma Frost is aware of what's happening, which, of course, in the comics, it's Emma in the comics who is the person doing that. Like, in the comics, she is essentially cosplaying as Jean and going into Scott's mind. So I don't know if that's what they're going for here. But that's where it makes, in the comics, Scott comes across really bad in that, even though it's often been argued that, like, is he even in control of what's happening here? Is she sort of wedged her way so far in his mind that he can't see? So with this, you feel for Scott because he's got this woman that he loves who's kind of been split in two. Like, he doesn't know where Jean begins and ends in terms of his time with Madeline, and he definitely had a child with Madeline, so it's not like he just can't have feelings for her, which, again, goes back to that third episode where we're like, Scott is just very dismissive of Madeline.
Yeah.
And Jean is looking at all these memories, and Wolverine is talking to her, and he mentions something about dealing with memories and looking back through your memories. I can't remember the line he says. It's a very poetic line that Wolverine says. So while looking at all these memories and saying, like, the one thing I know is that I love Scott, and she kisses Logan. And Logan's like, you're Jean Grey. He's Scott Summers. You just forgot it for a second. And then he walks away. It's very strange that Jean does that while talking about how much she loves Scott. Like, that's the strange part about it. So Jean does that. She actually kisses another man and then gets mad at Cyclops for having thoughts for her, a different her. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a little contradictory. I just like Wolverine's involvement in that scene the most, really, but yeah, it was kind of an interesting choice. I mean, I get it. There's a lot of uncertainty going on. People do stupid things, but yeah, I was fine with it for the most part.
Yeah, so they kind of have a blow-off where she's like, you're sharing thoughts with another woman, but the other woman is a version of her. And he tries to explain this to her, and she says that the one thing that I'm certain of are my memories of you. And he's like, am I just memories, or am I feelings of love to you? So it's complicated, but it is actually interesting stuff. It is very soap opera, and it's funny that exists in the episode where Nightcrawler also makes fun of Gambit, or not makes fun of, but he brings up to Gambit, like, oh, you and Rogue trying to work things out, you Americans and your soap operas. So we also get this love triangle of sorts between Rogue, Gambit, and Magneto. What did you think of this?
Again, it was like this was hinted at in an earlier episode, but I like where it goes. You know, even despite where it fits in the timeline, we don't really know exactly, but it does bring up a lot of tension, and then it's just like everything that happens in this episode. It's just like Rogue is just devastated, and like she just I really love like where they bring that in the future. So like I do like at this point where the love triangle's at.
Mm-hmm. It's enough to make you understand why Rogue might want to be with Magneto.
Yeah.
But I mean, Rogue and Gambit, you want to see those two characters together. But this is a very good Gambit episode. I mean, we'll get to what happens in a moment, but there's a lot of growth in his character that we see in this episode. Like even when Magneto kind of dismisses him as being immature or childish, and that's kind of the thing about Gambit is that he doesn't take a lot of things seriously. Like when we get Gambit-centric episodes in the old show, like the Days of Future Past episode springs to mind. They bring up, you've never been truly honest with us about your life. And then there's the episode where he goes back to the Thieves Guild, where he's meant to marry this one woman. Like he lived a life of crime. That's all we know. Like that's one of the things to like about Gambit. He's kind of this mysterious guy and very charming. I mean, Gambit's such a likable character in the animated series that his fate in this episode really hit me. So there's a moment where Cable arrives and he's like, we got to get everyone out of here. But then he ends up fading away because this is a fixed moment in time. And then that's when there's a big kaiju-style sentinel that shows up. And it is chaos. What did you think of all this?
Yeah, it was really cool. So they did the Tri-Sentinel, and yeah, it just wreaks havoc on everything, and you know everyone's just really desperate to take it down. And I really love like Magneto during all of this, and like how he's kind of split between like his aggressive nature towards like you're fucking with mutants and all of that, but also looking out for just all the mutants that he can. It is all very good and in character for him, and yeah, and then a lot happens.
Yes.
A lot happens.
First, we're led to believe that Magneto was killed in this episode, which we find out later is not the case. But before that does happen, Magneto tells Leech in German, don't be afraid, and then they get blasted. Rogue goes to fly the Sentinel, and then Gambit throws his bike at her to stop her, and then he gets stabbed by the Sentinel. So the Sentinel says something like, mutant intruder neutralized. And then he says, the name's Gambit, mon ami. Remember it. And then he supercharges the Sentinel, and then it blows up. And then we get the aftermath where the following day, it's just, there's countless casualties and fatalities. And then Rogue has Gambit in her arms, and she says the line, I can't feel you.
Yeah.
And that's how it ends.
This is a very good way to close it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we haven't talked about yet in this entire discussion is the showrunner, Beau DeMayo. He was fired before this first season even aired. So there hasn't really been an official statement as to why that was the case. Allegedly, it was because he had an OnlyFans account, but not like a non-nude, non-porn account. So who knows? But he's been on social media quite a bit talking about the show. And look, if you're going to do X-Men the animated series again, you can't just do it again. Like you have to move on and change with times. And that was one of my worries going into the show was like, you're putting the X-Men, like the 90s X-Men stamp on this, but you can't possibly make that show the same way. And the way Beau DeMayo has explained it is that like he wanted the first couple episodes to be comfortable reintroductions to that show, and then this episode was essentially 9/11 happens.
Yeah.
So that was the intention behind it, and this was the big turning point. So with this, it now feels like a different X-Men show. Like, this was heavy stuff. Like, the X-Men animated series dealt with heavy subject matter, but in a family-friendly Saturday morning cartoon manner. This had blood. This had visual deaths. Like, its audience is people my age. But it's supposed to be for fans of the original show. Like, there are so many, and yet there's so many kids' toys for this. Like, I hate the idea of a cartoon that's definitely made for a younger audience or for families, and people saying like, oh, this is not for kids. The Clone Wars is not for kids. Shut the fuck up. Like, that sort of thing really bugs me. Like, you know, like, something like Invincible is not for kids. But I hate the idea that something that is family-friendly, just because it deals with subject matters that adults can get into, is not made for kids. Like, I hate that. But with Bo, I mean, like, we can speculate all we want about Bo. Like, is there something that happened that they just addressed and wasn't news first? Like, and that's just not something that we're used to. You know, it's something, it comes out in the media about someone's misbehavior. And I don't want to accuse anyone of anything, because he might be a totally innocent man that Disney just decided they were going to go in a different direction. I mean, they might have had disagreements on production. So I definitely don't want to speculate or accuse someone of doing something they may not have done anything wrong. But I tend to think they're just not going to, you know, after the success of this, like, they weren't just going to let someone go that was responsible for so much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we get to episode 6, where it is Life Death Part 2.
Yeah.
I really like the Storm story in this, and it is funny that separating the Life Death story over 2 episodes, where the first part was only the second half of another episode, and this shared its episode with the stuff of the Adventures of Charles in Space. So it almost feels like this could have been one episode, maybe just 2 characters. I don't know. Here's my theory. Maybe just 2 characters, you know, maybe they felt that might be a little bit boring, or might not be interesting enough or dynamic enough if it's just the same 2 characters for a whole episode. So maybe they started that way and then felt the need to split it. So,
I think probably a bigger part is that, like, you kind of want, after what just happened in episode 5, where it's like, holy shit, you know, what the hell just happened? And then going from that to just 2 characters, again, as some people might think, is especially since, like, the Genosha attack, as far as main X-Men go, it was just Rogue, Gambit, and Magneto, and I guess Nightcrawler too.
yeah.
And so, like, that was it. So, like, I think there was, like, that we need to see some more X-Men in this episode. But, you know, that begs the question, why is this just Life Death Part 2? Why is it not Life Death Part 2 / Charles in Space or whatever? I don't know.
But yeah, let's talk Storm real quick.
Okay.
There's a moment where she does regain her powers, and she's flying through the desert, and she's got her 80s costume on, the black costume with, like, the tiara and everything. And it kind of felt like Man of Steel. And Bo DeMeo confirmed as much, that was the intention, that was the inspiration, was Man of Steel. So, but I like the stuff with Storm's claustrophobia. Like, the adversary is also voiced by the actress voicing Storm. So if you're paying close attention, you could go like, oh, this is something that's in her mind. And there's a moment where Forge essentially uses sorcery, but it's all like the effects of MCU Doctor Strange. Like, they just borrowed that, which is funny. Because, I mean, obviously, Doctor Strange was technically in an episode of X-Men, the animated series, but he didn't do anything. He was, like, reacting to, like, some kind of psychic probe or something once. But we didn't see what his powers looked like there. But he did show up in The Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man. But I like the Storm story quite a bit. Do you have any thoughts on Storm here?
No, nothing much other than what you said. Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah. The Xavier story was interesting. I don't totally know how I feel about it, to be honest.
I'm kind of in the same boat, because it's like, I'm fine with Xavier. Like, he never really died in the original show.
He didn't, no.
I did like his send-off, and I feel like, just, if you're going to have him back, I felt like it probably should have been, like, another season maybe. Like, what they do with him in here is fine, but there's already a lot that's happening in the show. I don't really think Xavier is, like, a necessity to throw it into the mix until you get to, like, the last episode, I'd say. But
sure.
yeah.
so it was cool at the beginning to hear kind of like a version of the Shi'ar theme or the thing that would play, when Gladiator or any of the Shi'ar stuff was going on in the old show. I like the moment later where Xavier takes over their minds and makes them all sit in class as he tries to teach them about
That was neat,
prejudice
yeah.
and stuff. And then that was the moment where he discovers that Gambit is dead. And that was the closest we got to an Xavier freakout, which I loved. That's pretty much the episode, though. Is a split between Storm and Xavier. Episode 7. This is the Rogue Goes Bonkers episode.
Mm-hmm.
So we get some appearances from other Marvel characters here. First up, we get Thunderbolt Ross, which then led to Captain America, voiced by Josh Keaton. What did you think of this?
Oh, I didn't even know that was him.
It was Josh Keaton.
Cool. Yeah. I thought it was a nice little cameo. He was in the original show, Captain America, right?
Yes, he was in an episode with Wolverine during World War II.
That's right. Okay. And then obviously I remember him getting pulled into Secret Wars in the Spider-Man show.
Mm-hmm. As did Storm, funnily enough.
Oh yeah, that's right. Storm did too.
So, here's something I want to bring up real quick. Does Secret Wars take place before or after this?
I don't know. That's a good question. Well, okay. Did Secret Wars, did that like bring Captain America like into the modern age? Did that happen in that storyline? I forgot.
So what happened in Spider-Man, that 5th season of Spider-Man, Captain America was technically revived during the 6 Forgotten Warriors arc, where that brought back a bunch of like Golden Age heroes, but Captain America and Red Skull were both brought back from a vortex because he wasn't frozen in the show. He was sucked into a vortex with Red Skull.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then that arc ends with Captain America putting Red Skull and himself back in the vortex and destroying it. In Secret Wars, the Beyonder summons the Red Skull as one of the villains to take over that planet.
Mm-hmm.
But then when Spider-Man's choosing his team, he chooses Captain America. But then by the end of that Secret Wars storyline, the Beyonder sends everyone back to where they were originally. So does that mean that Captain America and Red Skull both went back in the vortex?
I guess he made it out okay. I mean, well,
I guess
other okay, so other Marvel characters show up in the show too, and
yeah, we'll get to those cameos later.
We'll get to those, yeah. But yeah, that was interesting because I was thinking about that because I didn't remember the exact order of events from Spider-Man, but yeah, I thought that was Captain America had a nice little cameo in here, and I don't really remember what Ross. Oh yeah, because Storm went to the base and kind of fucked shit up. Yeah, okay, yeah, now I remember.
Yeah, so it was nice to have a cameo like that to show the greater Marvel universe does exist, and something like this where a huge terrorist attack occurs. It's not just the X-Men who are trying to solve it or figure it out. Like there are other heroes who would also try and do that. So I like the Captain America cameo for that reason. And I'll say one more thing on the Captain America front. Like him saying like, okay, I've got to do this by the book. Like it actually made sense within the context of the story because Rogue is hurting a lot of regular people doing their jobs as like security guards. Like we got to be smart about what we're doing as opposed to, well, hey, stop, just going around doing what you want. Like it was more like we have to have an actual strategy here. Like we can't just storm into places and beat the crap out of whoever we want to get the answers. And with Rogue, she really only talks about Gambit, even though she also briefly mentions Eric as well. Like Nightcrawler says that to her later, like you lost 2 loves. And because I mean, he doesn't know that Rogue chose Gambit. And that's part of the tragedy of all of this is that Rogue did reject Magneto's offer to be his queen and, chose Gambit. But Gambit has no idea. Like he didn't get to find out before he died, which is part of the tragedy. So that could play into why Rogue is more cut up about Gambit than she is with Magneto. And then in this episode, we also get some more developments with Scott and Jean, where this time they're just talking it out. It's very mature. It's characters talking about their feelings, which at first they weren't talking. Now we get to see them have a conversation. And Jean said something to Scott like, I know how much she means to you and Nathan, so she's more understanding now. And, would she be if Madeline hadn't potentially died on Genosha? Like, I don't know, but I like that they're actually talking about their feelings in this episode.
Yeah.
And There's another moment I love is the president, as in Senator Kelly, now President Kelly, is talking to Cyclops, and he's like, I'm sorry, Scott, you know, and Scott's like, yeah, but if it wasn't an island of mutants, this would be a different story, wouldn't it? And we're starting to see even more that disconnect that the government has with mutants and how angry that's making characters like Cyclops, who are usually a lot more level-headed and in line with Xavier's dream. And we got to see that with Beast, which was nice because Beast is a great character. But he is a gentle giant, and he's so intellectual that you don't get a lot of bashing heads with humans a lot. There's a great episode of the original show called Beauty and the Beast, where Beast is a doctor at this facility for the blind, and he's helped perform the surgery on this woman so that she can see. And her father is just an enormous bigot. And at the end of the episode, he shakes Beast's hand and asks him how can he repay him because he saved her life. And he says something like, "This is a start." And you kind of get the sense that that's what Beast is looking for. He is the most different looking. He can't fit in, so he has to show restraint. And this was really testing him. And the reporter who was trying to do the right thing, but she has a job to do, and he resented the fact that she made this announcement of what happened on Genosha standing in front of the mansion. Like, I just thought that was good stuff. Like, we don't get a ton of stuff with Beast in the show, but he's got a really great presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you basically said it all, yeah.
But yeah, so Rogue has gone rogue, so to speak. And the fact that the X-Men are still there to support her was really nice because obviously she wasn't at Gambit's funeral. Like, she's looking for revenge, but they're still there for her, which was a really nice moment. So they all kind of work together to go after Trask, and then Rogue kills Trask, or at least she believes she does. And I actually don't think everyone was shocked. I think like Nightcrawler and Beast were shocked, but I didn't think Cyclops and Jean were that shocked. They were just kind of like, Like, that's where we're starting to see the X-Men get a little more aggressive. But as I said, Trask did not die. He's now a Sentinel, essentially. And then we get our introduction to, I guess, the main antagonist of the season, and that is Bastion, who is working with Sinister. And he's keeping Magneto alive. So that's the other big thing. This is where we find out that Magneto's alive. That's another thing I forgot to mention in the previous episode. That's where we found out that Sinister was responsible for Genosha, which I thought was a shocker to me. But he is working with Bastion here. What do you think of Bastion?
It was kind of weird, like how he was introduced really late in the season. Obviously you're keeping the mystery alive and you're reintroducing all your main characters, but I don't know. I didn't really feel like we got enough of Bastion in this season. He's fine, but like, it's also weird because he's not in it too much, and then he kind of gets the spotlight taken away from him at the end. So it's really weird, but he's fine.
He feels like he could have been a character that was in the original show. Like, you can see how different the voice acting is over the two shows in this episode as well, because a character like that, I think, would have sounded very robotic in the original show. And this guy has got, like, charisma, and he's a bit charming in a creepy way. It's funny seeing him interact with Sinister because Sinister has that voice modulation on, and he's so over the top. Not over the top performance-wise, but just his look and everything. Like, he's got that giant cape that isn't really a cape. Like, he just looks very theatrical. And then you've got this guy who kind of talks like a smooth jazz radio guy. Like, he's just totally different for the X-Men. So I kind of like that. But then we get to episode 8, which kicks off the 3-parter finale of the season. And this, I gotta say, this episode was very exciting because it's like anything could happen here. And it was just so exciting. I did not know what was going to happen. And notably, we get a lot of Wolverine action in this episode.
Yeah.
Which I think fans complain about. It's like, why isn't Wolverine doing anything in this season? But no, Wolverine gets to do some stuff in this one. What do you think of this episode?
I really liked it. So this one, like, Magneto wasn't. He breaks at the end of this episode.
Yes, this is the episode.
Okay. Yeah, it's really great start to a big finale, and Yeah, Wolverine was pretty cool in it too.
Yep. And this episode was also full of Easter eggs. There was
Mhm.
a Stark Expo thing in Bastion's house, and there was a reference to Utopia and things like that. There's a Machine Man doll. William Stryker's on TV at one point. Magneto has Auschwitz branding, which is the same numbers that appeared in the comics and the movies. This is another tidbit that I found out. Apparently, Bastion's parents were actually background characters in the original show
Oh,
that were
okay.
sort of repurposed here. What do you think? I gather this is your first time hearing of this. What do you think of that?
I didn't even know that. Yeah, so that's that's pretty interesting, I guess. Um, so like they didn't have like any like big role in the original show at all, did
I
they?
don't think so, but they definitely come from an episode, I believe, that involved the Sentinels.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, but I like it because it doesn't feel like, oh God, why'd they have to tie it to that? Because it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Like the kid in Iron Man 2 is Peter Parker with the Iron Man mask, like which is very forced. Like this is nice.
Yeah.
Like I think that's a pretty neat detail.
Hmm.
Then we get some cameos. We get Doctor Doom shows up for a little bit, as does Baron Zemo, and of course we get a Spider-Man appearance.
Hmm.
I won't lie, I was waiting for that voice to come through, but he didn't speak.
He didn't speak. Yeah.
But I guess the other big thing that happens in this episode is Valerie Cooper releases Magneto, and he flies to Antarctica or something, or to the poles, and
Yeah.
he uses his metal ability to turn off all the zombie sentinels, and we get the Magneto was right line from Valerie. That was wild to see in a show like this.
Hmm.
That was a really cool full circle in a way for Magneto's arc, because Wolverine references that he's just declared war. Here's something that we haven't actually touched on yet. The animation. Uh,
Oh yeah.
what did you think of the animation in the show?
So I think we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the trailers, but
Yeah.
this is definitely like a morph of like it's what if animation disguised to look like the original series like
Mm.
style. So like uh kind of slower frame rates and movements and stuff like that. But um I actually kind of like the animation in this.
Yeah.
It's kind of just like going on with the show itself. It's like it's its own thing that is heavily inspired by the original series. It's not just like, oh, we're going back to going 2D animations. Like, no, it's 3D, but like it does a good job blending both ways, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's even moments, like particularly in the fifth episode, where there's like almost like anime like inspirations
Yeah.
to some of the action sequences. You know, considering when we first talked about that trailer and the animation was the big thing we were talking about, like how it doesn't look up to snuff. Like maybe I'm just not noticing it within the context of the show. But some
Hmm.
of those really low frame rate type of animation that appears all throughout the trailer to me hasn't been in the show a ton. So, like especially in the action sequences, those look great. Like
Hmm.
Wolverine flying through the air and chopping through people looked great. I was going to mention Nightcrawler earlier with the three swords, which is
Oh
pretty
yeah.
cool. Like when the
Hmm.
swords fell off the wall, I was like, oh, you know what's coming. But having three swords with one in the tail and him just slicing through people is great. So as was playing, classical music, like that was awesome. I love that. And this is the episode that ends with Xavier returning to Earth, and he's back, and that leads into episode 9. What did you think of this one?
This one was really good. So I like how not everyone's really kind of in agreement with Charles. Just because Charles back, it doesn't really change anything. There's
Mhm.
disagreement amongst the groups. Rogue and Sunspot join Magneto. Did anyone else join him, or was it just the two of
I think
them?
it was just those two.
Okay. Um, but yeah, and it kind of creates like these two conflicts between like Bastion and Magneto, and it splits up the X-Men in a way to have to deal with both. Um, and I think this is where we get the. Is this the episode where we get the reference to the X-Men first X-Men movie? Or it's like, what do you prefer, black leather?
Yes, yes. This is the episode.
Yeah.
What I'll say about this one is that it didn't really feel like we properly got to dive into Charles's whole choice there to leave the X-Men and stay with the Shi'ar, because then he just comes back and there was no mention of his time there at all. So we don't know if he was meant to be going back or what. But yeah, I mean, that's a huge decision, like living in space. But anyway, they didn't quite address the decision there. So they get dressed in old costumes. I want to talk about that real quick because there was a lot of people online saying like, oh man, these new costumes are terrible. Like, why they take a step back? And it's like, well, it's meant to be that they went to an old base, so it's old costumes. It's meant to give off a sense of desperate times. But I guess the main crux of this episode is the setup of, I guess, the next episode where there's like essentially a giant asteroid that's about to crash Earth. If anything, this kind of felt like a better version of Age of Ultron.
I was thinking that too, especially in the last episode where they're like stopping it. It was just like, it's almost exactly like Age of Ultron.
That's why I say I think this is a better Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
So like you were saying towards the end, Rogue and Sunspot do leave the team. And I gotta be honest, I didn't love this bit so much. I thought this part was poorly explained because in the next episode, they're just fighting side by side again. It's like that never happened.
Yeah, it was weird.
So like we have several different characters at different points. Like I believe Jubilee and Sunspot are on the ground. Everyone else is going to space. And then we get a big cliffhanger in this episode where Magneto turns. And like first Wolverine stabs Magneto. And I was like, whoa. And then they follow that up further with Magneto ripping his adamantium skeleton out of him. And when that happened, I was like, no. Like when that's how they ended it. Like that was an incredible cliffhanger.
Yeah, and we still don't really know the fate of like what's going to happen with Wolverine, so.
Yeah. But then you just want to dive straight into the finale?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the episode 10, what did you think of the Charles and Eric mind battle?
Oh, it was beautiful. It was so good, yeah. Just everything, the dialogue, just even like background stuff. It's just like how the water just keeps on rising as like tension is rising and everything. It's just so good. And yeah, I love this so much.
It is beautiful stuff, like you were saying. That's the best way I could describe it. It's just, I'm blown away we got something like that.
Yeah.
But then, meanwhile, back on Earth, we get a whole slew of cameos in this episode. I have a list here. I have a list here, and I'm going to go through some of the names the characters we see. We see Daredevil. We see Doctor Strange. Cloak and Dagger. So finally, they made an appearance in something besides their own TV show. We get some mutants. There's Psylocke, Puck, and Northstar, I believe. And obviously, we get some more Captain America. We also get Iron Man, which is great. The reason I love
the president.
Which I love because it's like, yeah, nobody was reading Avengers comics in the 90s. They're just not doing anything. And then we get Black Panther, although the interesting thing with Black Panther is that they confirm in this episode that it is not T'Challa, it is T'Chaka. Which is strange because T'Challa was actually in the Fantastic Four show.
Oh, interesting.
So, I think it's very obvious why they did this. It's just because Chadwick Boseman is dead.
Yeah.
But then I don't see why that should affect other things that didn't involve him.
It affect like an alternate universe, it's fine.
So, and people are saying, oh, just recast T'Challa in the MCU. It's like, they're not going to do that. Like, I'm not on board with the recast T'Challa thing that people are still going on about. It's not going to happen, first of all. So fucking give it up, people. These people have to have they may have a little bit of a point if Marvel are just going to not do anything with that character anymore in the media. I mean, like I said, T'Challa was in the 90s Fantastic Four show. So it's just, it's just strange to see that they didn't even do that here. Anyways, some other cameos. We also get Omega Red. We get Darkstar. And we get Crimson Dynamo. And then meanwhile, Jean, Scott, and Cable are all fighting Sinister. And then she unleashes the Phoenix Force. and then Bastion also rips Cable's arm off. And let me tell you, when he ripped the arm off, I had the thought that he should beat him with it. And then that's exactly what he did. I was so happy to see this. Not that it was happening to Cable, but I was just like, he should beat him with it. And he did. So that's good. So Jean uses the Phoenix Force on Sinister and essentially removes his power and basically ages him up tremendously. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, do you think this is the end of Sinister?
We'll see. I mean, he's a really big villain in the show, in the original show, so he might have a future. Maybe not in season 2, but depending on how long this goes, we'll see. But
yeah,
I don't know if I'd say it's the end. I don't think it's the end for him yet, but
okay. I think it could be because we've seen him die a few times, and Cyclops kind of exploded him, and yeah, this seemed like this might be the end. And look, I complained about the use of Sinister in that third episode because I initially thought that might be all we were getting from him. We definitely got more, but I don't think we truly got the proper characterization that I was hoping for from Morph in terms of him being afraid of Sinister. Like, they showed that in the intro for all these episodes that he's just afraid of Sinister. But they didn't quite properly deal with that trauma of him being around. But he did get kind of like the last laugh and get a little bit of comeuppance by saying, like, you look the same to me. So that was lovely. So there is a big fight with Bastion, which we should talk about. Rogue says his name was Gambit. Remember it. And she tries to punch him into oblivion. And then Cyclops fights him, and he does his Marvel vs. Capcom Omega level blast. And Jubilee even gets one on him. Like, he says something like, what are you going to do, attack me with the 4th of July? And she's like, I haven't heard that before, and goes after him. And then the X-Men all got to have some cool fight scenes with him. And Cyclops is all flipping around and everything, and he just gets to show a lot more agility than he's ever shown. And then meanwhile, back on Earth, there's the Magneto Protocol, and it's got this big file on Magneto. And amongst it, I did want to bring this up because on closer inspection, it has some of his known aliases. There's Eric Lenscher, there's Magnus, and then there's David Hemblin, which is the original actor from the animated series. Then Ian M, and the rest of his name is crossed out. And then Michael F, and the rest of his name is crossed out. So they had a little tribute there to the 3 good actors, which made me realize, man, Magneto is really well cast, isn't he? Like, I don't know if they've ever really screwed that up.
Yeah.
But then, in Age of Ultron style, the asteroid is crashing into Earth. And then that's when we get some more cameos. We get Peter Parker and Flash Thompson, and then some lady made of water. So, I want to talk about this real quick.
Okay.
Bo DeMeo on Twitter did confirm that at some point Peter Parker did find Mary Jane.
Okay.
And I'm like, nope, that doesn't line up. I disagree. Because, here's why. Spider-Man ends in 1998. That's my 2 cents. The lady in that scene is water. So, sorry, I don't care what you guys say. That's what I'm saying. Because Mary Jane, I mean, look, this could all be lined up in different ways, however you want to spin it. But X-Men the Animated Series ended in 1997. Mary Jane got sucked into a portal by the Green Goblin in 1996. Her Hydro Man clone was introduced in 1997, and then the Spider-Man show ended in 1998. I am convinced that this is the Hydro Man clone.
Okay. I think it's the real MJ. I don't know. the title X-Men 97, like, to me, that's just kind of a more of like a meta thing of like picking up where it left off in a way. Because I mean, it's obvious, like, at least a few months has passed by since you said that earlier, has passed by since the finale of X-Men. Yeah. And where exactly
Charles, like, yeah, because technically Charles's death certificate says 1996.
Okay. And yeah, and where exactly, like, where Spider-Man takes place in all of this, we don't really know because they only have like that one crossover episode and Storm and Secret Wars. Mm-hmm. Which that does beg the question: is it like, did Spider-Man save Captain America too while he was searching for MJ? That might be the case, and yeah, we don't know. But yeah, I texted or I thought about texting you when I was watching. It's like, oh, it looks like he found MJ. That happened, but yeah,
Yeah,
it
Bo
was
DeMeo did confirm that that was meant to be the real Mary Jane, that he did find
okay.
her.
Okay.
So they're able to stop the asteroid. However, the X-Men are all split into different time periods.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into that, we need to talk about the Forge board, as I'm calling it. So Forge meets up with Bishop, and there's a board in the background with a bunch of X-Men characters, and I have to talk about this board.
Okay.
Because there's a lot, and I have a list here. But notably, this marks the first appearance in this continuity, Shadowcat, a.k.a. Kitty Pryde, who is not a character in the original show. And let me tell you,
Yeah.
when I saw that, I let out the Prometheus scream. It was a sight to behold. So like, but anyways, here I'm gonna read off the list of names I saw, and then what was written by them. So X-Men, missing, presumed dead. Scarlet Witch, off-world. Colossus, he's just there but with nothing on him. Dust is there with nothing. Archangel is listed as missing, presumed dead. So what happened to Archangel? Iceman, nothing on him. Havoc, nothing. Exodus, nothing. Quicksilver, off-world. So the Maximoff twins are just off-world for some reason. What's going on there?
I guess. Yeah.
Shadowcat and Emma Frost are both fine. Cable, Jubilee, and Sunspot are AWOL. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. But anyways, so some of the X-Men are in the desert, and then some are in, like specifically Jean and Scott are in the distant future.
Mm-hmm.
But we do get, in the desert, we find out that this is indeed meant to be the start of Apocalypse. We get a young Insa Nur, and Beast says, "Oh dear."
Oh dear.
But then we get an end credit scene where a certain familiar face shows up on Genosha. It's none other than Apocalypse. Apocalypse picks up a Gambit card. And it's like, well, what's going to happen here? Is Gambit going to be a horseman? Because we established that this was a fixed point in time. They couldn't do anything about it. But could he come back as a horseman?
Yeah. It's possible.
Yeah. So, like, I thought it was weird in, like, the previous episode, Rogue and Xavier were talking about where Remy was buried. And it's like, you know, he should have been buried here with the X-Men. It's like, that was a weird thing to say. Why'd you say that? But it was to inform the audience of where he's buried so that Apocalypse can exhume him, I guess. No one's ever really gone. But there's lots of candidates who you could do for horsemen. You know, obviously Gambit. Wolverine was a horseman as well, so maybe that's how you bring him back.
Yeah.
Because we still don't quite know what happened to what Wolverine's fate is in the end of this episode. We get that Morph admits his feelings to Wolverine. That's about it.
Yeah.
I mean, just thinking of other characters, you know, there's Deathbird, the Shi'ar lady. Banshee was a horseman at one point, as was Psylocke. Caliban you could do. There's Polaris, and I guess Angel if he's still alive. Whatever happened to him?
Whatever happened to him.
Yeah. So, I mean, the board with all those characters on it had people we've met and some we haven't. I would like there to be maybe a bit of an explanation of these different mutant groups that are out there. Like, we've got a little bit with Alpha Flight. We've got a little bit with X-Factor in the old show. I could see Age of Apocalypse being adapted to a certain degree in the next season and then doing a little bit with that. I mean, I thought for sure that we were going to get Onslaught this season, and we didn't get that far, but you know, Cyclops kind of saved us from it a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if we have a different creative group on this moving forward, because apparently they have recorded voices for season 2, or at least Cal Dodd said that they had. So who knows how far in advance we've got scripts for this thing, but this has definitely been a success. Not that Rotten Tomatoes is the be-all and end-all, but 99% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and just a lot of people online talking about how much they love this and X-Men again. It feels like this has been a big success. I dare say this is the best thing that Marvel has put out outside of comics in a long time. I mean, maybe since last year, like if you love Guardians 3, which we both did, but it does feel like this is one of the things they put out. They put a lot of care into, and it feels like we've gotten less of that from Marvel Studios recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Well, I was really just kind of like wondering, it's like, what do you think? Did this like spark a whole nother thing with like revival / legacy shows? Because I was thinking about that. It's like, would we ever see like animated Spidey get a revival or a legacy continuation? Because the door is open now, because we know stuff has happened. MJ's back and stuff like that.
And I know lots of people have been saying they want a Spider-Man 98 show. And look, let me be the first to say I do not want a Spider-Mid in 98. I want a spectacular Spider-Man 09. That's what I want more than anything else.
I was thinking stuff like that, or Earth's Mightiest Heroes. You can
that's
do more
such a great show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the door is open for all of that now, and I think that's a good way to, because this isn't really Marvel Studios, it's Marvel Animation.
Yeah.
So it's, if they're going to branch out, besides like Spider-Man freshman year, whenever the hell we're getting that, but
that's actually now Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man.
Oh, I didn't even know they changed that.
They changed the title. That's still coming out, I believe, later this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. But yeah, and so we have that, and What If season 3 is on the horizon. And then
there's going to be the Marvel Zombie show.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one too. But considering like this is like easily the biggest hit Marvel Animation side. I know it's only been 2 seasons of What If, but still, is like, this is so much more talked about than like what you got with What If, and really just most of recent Marvel stuff in general.
Yeah.
So it's there's definitely a future with this type of format, and so I'm curious if they will double down and like just bring back, or do legacy shows of all these older shows. So, and I'd be fine with that, especially like the ones we said, Spectacular and Avengers, where there was a lot more planned and we just never got to see it, unfortunately. So maybe there is a future for that.
I could also see, if you really wanted to do something with the 90s Spider-Man animated series, I could easily see them doing like a 1-hour special of Peter getting Mary Jane.
And I'd be fine with that. Yeah.
Sure. I'd rather take that over a whole show.
Yes.
I'd just rather see more Spectacular Spider-Man.
I would too. I mean, I'd still be fine, get Christopher Daniel Barnes back as Spider-Man, but and there's plenty of stuff you can do, but it'd be hard to see them do that in the same way they did X-Men 97, considering it's like what you got with the Spider-Man show. So we'll see, but doors open, and that's an important thing.
Yeah. So one last thing with Beau DeMayo is that he did write some episodes for season 2, but he's not going to be actively involved with the production of season 2. Because like I said, there's still the editing stages of that season. And then as of right now, there is no involvement of him in season 3. Mm-hmm. So, but what I'm hopeful for is, if I could send my good karma out to the universe, is they can continue to guide the ship forward that Beau DeMayo set with this first season.
Yeah.
I think they recognize that they have something really good on their hands, and they would want to continue that kind of quality. So that is my hope. So with that being said, we recommend this show. And if you haven't watched it and you've listened to all this, what's the matter with you? You just ruined it for yourself. Chris, where can the people find you?
You can find me over on Letterboxd and Instagram.
Yeah, same here. I'm also on X. I don't really do anything on X though. But what I do do is I am the video editor for the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. And yeah, check out everything on the YouTube channel, but we're also doing some, I say we, it's me. I'm doing content for their Instagram, their TikTok, and their X. So check out all those places. You just type in Amazing Spider Talk. You should be able to find it pretty easily. And yes, we'll see you all next time soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.